The wind moved across the frozen river, like breath from a mouth too old to speak. It scraped along the surface, whispering over the snow that had settled there for weeks. Beneath that white crust, the ice was never solid. It held weight for a while, then shifted, then groaned. Soviet infantrymen marched across it in long gray lines, boots striking the crust in rhythm with orders shouted through the cold. The current below waited, black and patient. One man looked down and saw a line forming at his feet, a pale thread that widened with each step. He tried to call out, but his voice was swallowed by the wind. The crack ran beneath the others before they even noticed. Then the surface buckled. Men began to drop, as if the river had swallowed them whole. Rifles, packs, helmets sank under the thin ice. Some tried to crawl toward the far shore, dragging themselves through freezing water that clung to their uniforms. Others simply stopped moving, their bodies stiffening as the current took them away. From the tree line ahead, the forest watched in silence. Then flashes erupted from the dark. Finnish guns opened fire. Muzzle bursts flickered between the pines, short bright sparks against endless night. The sound was not thunder, but a low metallic cough repeated again and again. Bullets struck the ice, splintering it into mist and shards. Men screamed, but the wind erased every word. A few soldiers made it close enough to the opposite bank to raise their rifles, but the river betrayed them. The ground beneath cracked again, wide this time, and drew them down. Some disappeared under the surface without a sound. Others clung to the edges, hands bleeding, trying to climb back onto ice that refused to hold them. The water darkened around them, touched by the traces of what they carried inside. When the shooting stopped, the forest went still. Only the creak of ice and the soft hiss of drifting snow remained. The survivors on the far bank stared at the empty river where their comrades had been moments before. No one spoke. Orders were whispered, but the words felt meaningless. They were told to advance again, but no one moved. Somewhere behind them, an officer shouted into a field telephone, insisting that a bridgehead had been established. His voice trembled even as he said it. The night deepened. Bodies drifted beneath the ice, carried by the current toward a lake no one could see. The river closed over them, as if nothing had happened. The next morning, frost formed across the cracks like white skis sealing a wound. For those who had fired from the trees, there was no celebration. They watched the river steam in the dawn light and felt the cold settle deeper into their bones. One of them said quietly that this was only the first crossing. The others did not answer. In wars fought in winter, victory looked too much like loss. In a few hours, new columns would come. The sound of engines would echo across the frozen landscape again. The river would groan, the wind would whisper, and the ice would remember. Morning rises gray and without promise. Smoke drifts across the snow from villages already abandoned. The roads leading north are crowded with wagons, horses, and families wrapped in blankets, stitched by hands now too numb to hold anything. Behind them, church bells echo through the cold, not for worship, but as warning. In the distance, the first waves of Soviet armor crawl through the white haze, engines rumbling like a storm beneath the earth. Finland is small enough that people still recognize each other's names across province. News travels by radio and rumor. The invasion has begun, and the line that was supposed to be peace is now only another border in flames. Soldiers leave their farms carrying rifles that belong to grandfathers' fossils. Mothers cut pieces of their own coats to wrap around the hands of sons who have never seen combat. The army is an army in name alone, a mosaic of farmers, students, hunters, and teachers. Yet they move with a kind of quiet coordination, as if the snow itself has been teaching them how to fight. In Helsinki, the air raid sirens are constant. People stand in doorways watching the sky. The bombers come again and again. The city shudders each time, but the lights of the capital stay on through the night. Volunteers run through the streets covering broken windows with cardboard. They whisper that no one expected to survive the first week. Still, when the all-clear sounds, they look up at the sky and whisper the same words again. Not yet. Out on the front, the men of the border guard dig trenches into permafrost so hard that shovels break. They burn scraps of timber to warm the metal, long enough to cut through the ground. Each man carries a few bullets and a pocket of bread. Their uniforms are mismatched, coats of every pattern and color. Yet when the Soviet shells begin to fall, they vanish into the snow as if swallowed by it. The forest becomes a wall. From Moscow, the war looks mathematical. A few 100,000 soldiers advancing against a nation smaller than many of its own cities. It should be over in days. Yet inside that imbalance, something strange begins to take shape. The cold favors the defenders. The silence favors those who know the trees. Soviet tanks stall in the drifts, their engines howling, before dying one by one. Crews abandon them and walk until they freeze where they stand. In the evenings, Finnish patrols return from the woods, carrying rifles taken from the dead. They hang their coats by the fire and speak little. A young lieutenant writes in his journal that the snow has started to feel alive, that it breathes when the wind moves through it. He does not write about fear. He writes about patience. In the capital, a small girl asks her father when spring will come. He tells her that the ground must rest before flowers can return. He does not tell her that, even if they win, the soil will remember the dead for years. Outside, the snow continues to fall. Foreign newspapers print maps that make Finland look like a white scar across a continent at war. Commentators predict collapse, yet each week, the lines on the map remain the same. The world begins to notice. The impossible is happening. A country of 3 million is holding against an empire that covers half the earth. No one can explain it. The cold cannot explain it. Neither can courage alone. Something deeper is moving through those forests. Something made of memory and stubborn will. And as the nights grow longer, both armies begin to understand that the real enemy is not each other, but the winter itself. It does not care who crosses the rivers or who holds the cities. It watches them both and waits for the weak to stop moving. Some stories begin with noise. This one begins with silence. On the border, near a small place called Mainila, the snow has settled so deep that even footsteps seem afraid to break it. Soviet artillery crews stand beside their guns waiting for orders that make little sense. Their breath drifts upward in slow white plumes. Across the frozen fields, there is no movement, no sign of an enemy. Only the faint line of the Finnish frontier, marked by a row of thin birches. The order comes at dusk. Fire. The first shell leaves the barrel with a hollow crack that echoes through the woods. Then another, and another. The explosions bloom harmlessly inside Soviet territory. The ground shakes. Men duck out of instinct, not understanding why. When the smoke clears, fragments of birch trees fall back onto the snow. Somewhere, a voice in a command post writes a report claiming that Finland has opened fire on the Soviet Union. In Helsinki that night, telephones ring through the corridors of government buildings. Officials gather around radios, trying to understand the accusations. The shelling of Mainila is described as an unprovoked act of aggression. Demands follow within hours. Pull back your troops from the border. Disarm the positions you have built for defense. Move 20 kilometers north or face the consequences. It is not a negotiation. It is a verdict waiting for a signature. The Finnish cabinet sits in dim light, smoke curling above their heads. Outside, the city is quiet, except for the low hum of air raid sirens being tested again. The ministers know what is coming. They remember the meetings in Moscow. the impossible demands, the smiles that never reached the eyes of their hosts. Someone whispers that the first shot of the war has already been fired, even if the world does not yet believe it. In the border villages, families begin to move westward through the snow. Horses pull sleds stacked with furniture and grain sacks. Children stare back at the woods that hide the frontier, where artillery still glows faintly like the embers of a dying fire. No one has told them they are refugees yet. They will understand soon enough. Far to the east, reports arrive on Stalin's desk before dawn. They are exactly what he expects to read. Finnish artillery has attacked Soviet soil. Soldiers have been wounded. This is the proof he needs, the reason for invasion already written by his own hand days before. He signs the papers that make it official. Diplomatic relations are severed. The non-aggression pact is void. The Red Army is to advance at once. Later, historians will find the documents and the coordinates, the artillery logs, the absence of Finnish shells. They will call it a false flag. But in the winter of 1939, there is no name for it. There is only the sound of engines warming in the cold and the rustle of maps being unfolded across desks. In the villages closest to the border, dogs begin barking before dawn. The horizon flashes red, then white. The ground trembles again. This time, the shells are not falling into the Soviet territory. They are crossing the line. Windows shatter. Men run from their beds, pulling on coats and rifles. Women lead children toward the forests. Somewhere, a radio operator sends the message that no one wanted to hear. The war has begun. The soldiers who fired those first shells at Mainila will never know what they started. Some will die within days. Others will vanish into the snow before the month ends. The lie they were ordered to tell has outlived them all. As morning rises over the Karelian isthmus, columns of Soviet troops move through the mist. They march past the craters their own guns have made, stepping over the frozen soil that has been declared foreign by decree. Above them, planes circle waiting for the signal to strike. The invasion is not an accident. It is the conclusion of a sentence written weeks before, a sentence that begins with a single word whispered in the dark. Now it is spoken aloud. At first the sound is distant, a low hum that could almost be mistaken for wind. Then it deepens, turning metallic, steady, relentless. The people in Helsinki know what it means before the sirens even begin. Mothers reach for children. Men close the shutters, though they know wood cannot stop what is coming. The air outside is too still, as if the entire city is holding its breath. When the bombers appear, they do not glide. They grow out of the gray sky, like shapes carved from iron. The first explosions tear through the harbor, scattering gulls into clouds of smoke. Windows implode in the central districts. Fire climbs the side of warehouses and government buildings. The streetcars still on their tracks are lifted and tossed aside like toys. Somewhere near the station, a tram burns until only its wheels remain. The air tastes of dust and kerosene. A woman carrying a child runs into a sheltered doorway and trips. The child slides across the frozen pavement and begins to scream. Someone lifts her up and presses her against the wall as the ground shakes again. In those seconds, no one speaks the word war. They only think of survival, of how long the walls will hold. Above the city, Soviet pilots watch the orange flashes below. Their maps show military targets, but bombs fall across neighborhoods and parks. The distinction between soldier and civilian dissolves in the firelight. Radios in Moscow will call it an operation of precision. The people under the bombs call it what it feels like, an erasure. When the all-clear sounds, it is hours too late. Snow drifts down mixed with ash. The streets are lined with the broken frames of homes. Volunteers move between fires, carrying buckets of water that freeze before they reach the flames. One man finds a piano in the rubble of a school. He opens the lid and presses a key. The sound that emerges is thin, hollow, ghostly. He closes it and walks away. By dawn, the smoke turns the sunrise into something unreal. The city has survived, though parts of it no longer exist. Children are led out of shelters, their full faces gray with soot. They stare at the sky that still hums faintly, waiting for the next wave. In the distance, columns of black rise from the port where ships still burn. The harbor ice glows red beneath the reflection. In an office beneath the government building, the Prime Minister listens to the first casualty reports. Numbers blur into each other. Each street name is a wound. Yet the message that must be sent to the world is one of endurance. He dictates a statement that begins with the words, "Finland continues the fight." He signs it with a hand that trembles only when the pen is put down. Across the countryside, radios broadcast fragments of his speech. In small villages, people stand around receivers and nod silently. The bombs have reached the capital, but the lines at the front still hold. The men in the trenches hear the same voice, faint through static, and tighten their grip on rifles gone cold as stone. That night, Helsinki burns less brightly. The fires have eaten what they can. Snow begins to fall again, thick and slow, covering the blackened walls and the craters in the streets. Someone says the snow is merciful. Someone else says it hides everything. In Moscow, reports claim that the mission was successful. In Helsinki, people dig through the ruins looking for their neighbors. One child finds the metal wing of a bomb and turns it over like a piece of strange machinery. She asks her mother if it can fly again. The mother shakes her head and says nothing. The city waits for morning, for another sound that might mean hope or might mean more fire. In the silence between sirens, you can almost hear the snow landing on what remains. The snow on the Taipale River looks solid in the early light. From a distance, it could be mistaken for land, a pale road stretching between forests. Soviet soldiers gather on the near bank, breath curling in the cold, waiting for the order that will send them forward. Their commander studies the map and tells himself the ice will hold. He does not look at the cracks already spidering beneath the surface. When the signal flare rises, men move as one dark wave. Boots crunch across the frozen crust. The river groans, low and animal. Some of the men begin to hum under their breath, an old march half remembered from another war. They are halfway across when the first machine gun bursts from the trees ahead. The sound rips through the stillness. Bullets strike the ice and throw up white dust that looks like smoke. The front ranks collapse, and those behind step over them, too afraid to stop moving. The current below the ice is strong. It waits for openings, finding them in the heat of exploding shells. Water rushes through the wounds in the river's skin. Soldiers drop their rifles and crawl, trying to spread their weight. Some make it a few meters farther, then vanish as the surface breaks. The cold takes them instantly. Others cling to floating debris, faces turning pale as marble. From the Finnish side, the defenders see only shapes moving through mist. They fire by instinct, by memory of where the first shadows appeared. Their guns stutter in rhythm with their breathing. The smell of powder hangs over the snow. Each shot feels like a question answered by silence. When darkness falls, the firing stops. The river steams faintly in the moonlight. Bodies drift beneath the thin crust, brushing against each other in slow circles. An officer on the Soviet bank writes in his report that a bridgehead has been secured. His hand shakes as he signs it. Behind him, men refuse to return to the crossing. They sit by the fires, staring at the glow, pretending it is warmth and not the reflection of flames burning far away. At dawn, the wind changes. Pieces of uniform and broken gear wash against the shore. A helmet spins slowly before the current carries it under again. The only sound is the crack of ice reforming over the holes. The forest stands silent. indifferent witness to the night's work. On the Finnish side, soldiers walk the banks collecting what remains. They move quietly, as if afraid to wake the river. One of them kneels and touches the surface where a face lies frozen just beneath. He whispers something that could be a prayer, or simply a word for farewell. No one else hears it. Later that day, snow begins to fall, soft and constant. It covers the footprints, the blood, the twisted metal, until the battlefield becomes white again. The men who survived will tell others that the river itself fought on their side, that it swallowed the invaders whole. But at night, when the campfires burn low, they admit another truth. The river takes everyone eventually. It just decides the order. The Mannerheim Line is not a wall. It is a collection of trenches and bunkers carved into frozen ground, connected by paths that disappear under snowdrifts. The men who built it called it a shield. But standing here, it feels more like a wound stitched shut with barbed wire. Each outpost has its name, painted on wood darkened by frost. The names are simple, the kind a man can remember while dying. Inside one of the bunkers, candles burn in bottles. The flame bends with every gust that slips through the cracks. Men sit shoulder to shoulder, boots steaming, rifles tied against the wall. Someone scratches a date into the plank beside him. Another tightens his scarf until it covers his mouth. The air smells of smoke, wool, and damp metal. Outside, the forest moans beneath the weight of snow. Command has told them the Soviets will come again soon. No one knows when. Days blend together. The sound of distant artillery echoes like a heartbeat through the hills. The men learn to measure time by the rhythm of shelling. When it stops, they sleep. When it starts, they wait. In the morning light, patrols move through the pines checking mines buried weeks before. Some have vanished under new snow. Others glint faintly, tiny circles of glass reflecting the gray sky. They mark the safe paths, with broken branches. Each step could be the wrong one. Yet the men keep walking. The routine becomes its own comfort. At midday, word spreads that reinforcements are coming. A few trucks appear, tires wrapped in chains, engines coughing through the cold. The men climb down from the vehicles, stiff as statues. They look around and understand that this is not a line they are joining, but a grave they are helping to dig. No one says it aloud. They unpack crates of ammunition and bread and vanish into the bunkers. The commander visits each position at dusk. He carries a notebook filled with sketches of the fortifications. He tells the men that the line will hold. His voice is steady, but his eyes flicker toward the horizon, where faint glows mark the Soviet camps. He knows the enemy is preparing something larger than before. The ground shakes sometimes, distant explosions from artillery practice. The sky above the forest flashes for an instant, then darkens again. That night, the temperature drops. The walls of the trenches crack with the sound of splitting stone. A soldier writes a letter to his wife, describing how the snow shines blue in the moonlight and how the silence feels too heavy to breathe. He ends the letter with the same line as before. Do not worry. Everything is calm. He folds the paper carefully and tucks it inside his coat. In the early hours, a scout returns from the front of the forest. His face is pale with frostbite. He says the trees are full of movement, that the air smells of oil and iron. The others listen in silence. They know what it means. Engines, tanks, the sound of war crawling closer through the dark. By dawn, the sky glows faintly red from the east. Snow falls again, soft enough to hide the trenches from above. The men watch the horizon where shadows gather like storm clouds. One of them murmurs that the river of the dead has found its continuation here. The rest say nothing. They tighten their belts, check their rifles, and wait. The wind carries distant music, a broken march played from loudspeakers across the front. It fades, leaving only the whisper of snow against metal. Every man on the line feels the same thought crawl through his mind. The attack is coming. The only question left is when. The order came at night. It arrived by radio, short and sharp, carried through the static like a whisper from another world. Move forward at dawn. Retake the lost ground. The officers looked at each other in silence. Everyone knew the plan was impossible. But orders were orders, and winter did not allow debate. Before sunrise, men lined up along the edge of the forest. Their breath rose in thin clouds that drifted across the snow. They could see the faint glow of Soviet campfires beyond the open fields. Between them and those lights lay a stretch of ground already scarred by craters and scattered remains. Someone muttered that the snow there was cursed. Another answered that all snow was cursed now. The signal flare rose, painting the sky red, and they began to move. The first steps were almost quiet. Then the machine guns found them. Tracers swept across the white plain, cutting lines through the drifting snow. Men dropped one after another. Some tried to crawl forward, dragging rifles behind them. Others lay still, frozen in place not by fear, but by the cold that claimed them as soon as they fell. From the rear, artillery answered with a roar that shook the forest. Shells arced overhead, bursting short of the enemy line. The ground erupted behind the attacking troops, showering them with ice and splinters. In the confusion, signals vanished. Platoons moved without direction, stumbling through smoke that smelled of iron and oil. The assault dissolved into fragments, small groups fighting without knowing why. By midday, the snow was red in patches, steaming under the pale sun. A medic crawled between the fallen, his hands raw and bleeding from the frost. He whispered to each man he found, asking if they could move. Most could not. He stopped asking. When he reached the edge of the field, he looked back and saw shapes he steered across the plain, like dark stones half buried in white. It was impossible to tell who was alive. At headquarters, the commander listened to the reports and pressed his hand to his forehead. He had begged to delay the attack, to wait for artillery support, for weather, for reason. The voice on the other end had said the same words every time. The high command demands progress. Progress had arrived in the form of silence across a dead field. That night, those who survived returned to the line. They carried no victory, only stories. They spoke of comrades who had disappeared into shell holes, of rifles frozen to hands that would never open again. The men at the bunkers listened without expression. When the stories ended, someone poured a small cup of spirits, set it on the table, and left it untouched. It was an offering to whoever still wandered out there in the snow. In Moscow, a report would later claim that the enemy had launched a brave but futile counterattack. The wording would be precise, the tone heroic. No one would mention the mistake that sent hundreds to their deaths for a few meters of ground no one could hold. The soldiers called it something else. The idiot's push, a phrase spoken quietly, with bitterness instead of anger. The next morning, the wind swept over the battlefield and erased the footprints. Snow filled the craters and covered the fallen. The landscape became whole again, pure and silent, as if mercy had chosen to hide what had happened. Yet beneath that smooth surface lay the memory of the men who had crossed it. Each drift concealed a story that would never be told. Back in the trenches, a young private wrote in his notebook before sleep. He said the snow no longer looked white to him. It had taken on the color of memory, something between gray and sorrow. He closed the book and placed it under his head as a pillow. The wind outside sounded like distant voices calling him by name. The forest is never silent. Even when the wind dies, there is a sound beneath the stillness, a faint cracking of branches far away, a sigh that seems too measured to belong to nature. The Soviet patrols moved through the trees, with rifles ready, eyes darting to every shadow. They have been told the enemy is near, but they see only snow and darkness. The trail behind them vanishes almost as fast as it forms. Each man begins to feel he is walking in circles, chasing the echo of his own steps. The first attack comes without warning. A flicker of movement, the whisper of skis on crusted snow, then gunfire so close it feels like thunder breaking inside the skull. The Soviets return fire blindly. Bullets strike trees, carving pale scars into bark. When the smoke clears, there is nothing left but silence again. No footprints, no bodies, only the smell of powder hanging in the frozen air. The men whisper among themselves that the Finns are ghosts. They speak the word not as insult, but as truth. Every night, the rumors grow. White figures glide between the trunks, appearing for a heartbeat, then vanishing into the drifts. Campfires burn low, because no one dares to light them high. They say the snow itself carries footsteps, that it remembers where you stand. In a clearing beside a frozen lake, a Soviet sergeant counts his men and finds 2 missing. He calls their names until his voice cracks. The trees answer with the creak of ice shifting on the lake. Hours later, the missing soldiers are found lying side by side, rifles still slung across their backs. No wounds, no sign of struggle. Frost has covered their faces in a thin mask of white. The sergeant orders their bodies buried under snow. By morning, the mounds have vanished. For the Finns watching from the woods, it is not mystery, but method. They know every bend of the terrain, every hollow where sound dies. They strike from the flanks, vanish through secret paths, and leave behind connoissance that spreads faster than fear. In daylight, they rest under branches cut from pine, invisible to aircraft overhead. At night, they move like the wind itself, unseen but everywhere. A Soviet lieutenant writes in his journal that he has begun to dream with his eyes open. He sees shapes moving between the trees that dissolve when he blinks. He has stopped sleeping altogether. The cold keeps him awake, and in that wakefulness, the line between real and imagined melts away. When a twig snaps, he fires without thinking. Once he shot at the shadow of his own breath. The forest feeds on the nerves of men. It twists their sense of time. Hours stretch until they break. A day feels like a week. Hunger dulls reason, and the cold sharpens it again in cruel balance. Command keeps sending messages from far behind the lines demanding progress. The patrols keep vanishing. Reports grow shorter, more desperate, until they stop entirely. In one abandoned camp, a Finnish soldier finds a notebook frozen open on a stump. The last words are smeared by ice. They read something like, "We are being hunted by the forest itself." He closes the book and leaves it there. There is nothing more to add. By the end of the month, the trees are full of echoes. Shots fired days before seem to replay themselves in the distance. Some Soviets begin shooting at the sound alone, at ghosts that might only be memory. The Finns listen from the shadows, waiting for the moment when fear finishes the work bullets begun. When night falls again, the wind returns, carrying with it a faint smell of smoke from burned supplies. In the darkness, the ghost army moves once more, gliding through the woods that have become their home. The forest closes behind them, erasing every sign they were ever there. In the forests north of the Karelian line, silence has become its own kind of weapon. The Soviet patrols speak in whispers now, afraid of the echo that might answer back. They have begun to name the silence. They call it the White Death. The name spreads faster than orders, carried in low voices from camp to camp. No one is certain if the man exists or if he is a story told by the frightened to explain the impossible. It begins with a single shot that seems to come from nowhere. A soldier falls without warning. There is no sound of a rifle, only the soft thud of a body meeting the snow. The others freeze, eyes scanning the tree line. The wind moves the branches, and every shadow becomes a threat. They fire into the woods, emptying magazines at ghosts. When the smoke clears, the forest looks unchanged. Then another man falls. Those who live long enough to tell the story say he wears no camouflage, only white wool and calm. He carries no scope, for glass catches light, and light betrays. He moves alone, carrying his rifle as if it were part of him. In the morning, he disappears into the frost. By night, he returns unseen, leaving behind only the silence of the dead. They say his breath never fogs the air, because he fills his mouth with snow before he fires. They say his heartbeat cannot be heard even by dogs. Finnish soldiers know his name. They whisper it with quiet respect, like a prayer to something older than war. To them, he is Simo, a farmer before he was anything else. He knows the woods as other men know their own hands. Each tree, each hollow, each slope that hides a shot is part of his memory. He writes nothing down. He leaves no diary, no boast. The proof of his existence lies scattered across the snow in the form of rifles dropped by men who never saw where the bullet came from. The Soviets send counter-snipers. They die within hours. They send artillery to erase entire hillsides. When the smoke lifts, he is gone, and the firing begins again from another direction. The soldiers begin to refuse orders to patrol alone, and here regiments change routes to avoid the forests he haunts. Their officers pretend not to notice. Fear has become contagious, a sickness that eats discipline first and courage second. One afternoon, after days of fruitless searching, a Soviet lieutenant kneels beside the body of his friend and looks into the untouched snow around him. No footprints lead in or out. He feels the weight of the unseen watching from somewhere beyond the trees. He raises his pistol toward the wind and fires once, not at an enemy, but at the fear that has hollowed him out. The sound dies quickly, swallowed by the cold. In the villages miles away, people speak of the man as if he were already a legend. They say he is protecting the homeland alone. They say the winter itself fights beside him. For those who live close enough to hear the distant cracks of his rifle, the legend feels real enough. It gives shape to hope, the same way fear gives shape to darkness. When spring finally comes, it finds him lying in the snow, his rifle beside him, his face shattered by a wound that should have ended him. But he breathes still. The medics carry him away, whispering his name like an oath. The man who became myth survives, though the war will continue without him. His silence remains. The forest that once hid him now keeps his secret. The Soviets will never find the ghost they hunted. The White Death will fade into stories told by soldiers who swear they saw him, or thought they did saw him, or dreamed of him in the endless nights when the cold crawled into their hearts. And long after the snow melts, the legend will remain, standing watch in the stillness of memory. In war, hunger arrives long before defeat. By the middle of December, the men of the Soviet regiment, moving through the woods near Tolvajärvi, have been marching for days without a warm meal. Their rations froze inside tin cans that will not open. Their officers promise that food waits ahead in a captured Finnish camp. The promise is enough to keep them walking. When they reach the village, smoke still rises from the chimneys. Pots hang above dying fires. The smell of meat drifts through the air, rich and unreal. Inside the camp, Finnish soldiers have withdrawn only hours earlier. They leave behind kettles filled with sausage stew, still hot, still steaming in the cold. The Soviet troops rush forward, like men who have forgotten they are soldiers. Rifles clatter to the ground. Gloves are thrown aside. They tear at the food with bare hands, burning their palms but not caring. Some laugh for the first time in weeks. Some weep. The officers shout for order, but no one listens. In the forest beyond the camp, Finnish patrols wait in the dark. They can hear the noise of the feast, the laughter mixed with metal scraping bowls. They move silently, spreading out, encircling the village as snow begins to fall again. The commander gives no speech. He simply raises his hand and drops it. Gunfire tears through the night. The first volley strikes without warning. Men fall among the kettles. Steam and blood mix, rising together into the frozen air. The smell of food turns sickening. Panic replaces hunger. Some reach for weapons only to find them buried under snow. Others run, slipping on the frozen ground, shouting for comrades who no longer answer. The officers try to rally them, but the chaos moves faster than orders. From the tree line, the Finns advance with bayonets fixed, firing in short bursts, methodical and cold. The Soviets break apart, fleeing toward the lake. A few attempt to stand and fight, but confusion has turned friend into foe. In the smoke and darkness, some fire on their own lines. By dawn, the village is silent again. Fires burn unchecked. Bodies lie where they fell, many still clutching pieces of bread. When the sun rises, the Finns walk among the ruins. They find the half-eaten meal, the pots overturned, the stew frozen into gray ice. One soldier kicks over a kettle and mutters that the enemy died with full stomachs. Another answers that there are worse ways to go. They laugh quietly, not from cruelty but from exhaustion. Then they begin the grim work of clearing the field. The story spreads quickly across both armies. To the Soviets, it becomes a cautionary tale about discipline lost. To the Finns, it is something darker, a symbol of how hunger strips men of reason and mercy. They call it the Sausage War, as if giving it a name might make it easier to remember. Yet for those who were there, the memory is heavier than any title. That night, a Finnish corporal writes in his notebook that he can still smell the food even after washing his hands in snow. He says the scent follows him, clinging to his clothes, haunting his sleep. In his dreams, he sees the enemy eating Smonix alive again, until the shots ring out and everything goes quiet. He wakes with the taste of smoke in his mouth and the feeling that the war has stopped making sense. By the next morning, the snow has covered everything. The field looks unmuched, smooth and white. Only the blackened kettles remain, scattered like graves with no names. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbles again, reminding everyone that hunger will return, and so will death. And perhaps there will be another meal left, waiting for whoever survives long enough to find it. Snow fell heavy over Suomussalmi that night, muffling every sound except the wind. The villagers moved like ghosts between their homes, carrying small bundles of what they could save. Behind them, soldiers poured fuel along the walls and across the roofs. Flames would come next. The order was simple and cruel. Leave nothing for the invaders. Burn everything. The people nodded without speaking. They understood that obedience was another form of grief. A farmer stood in the middle of the road with a torch in his hand. His wife watched from the doorway, holding a blanket around their youngest child. He hesitated only once, then touched the flame to the eaves of the barn. Dry wood caught instantly. Sparks rose into the air like birds taking flight. One by one, the neighbors followed. Houses that had stood for generations turned into pillars of fire. The snow around them hissed as it melted. The smell of smoke filled the sky. The soldiers waited until the last family left the edge of the village. They carried what they could on sleds, their faces hidden by scarves and tears. Behind them, the light grew brighter, orange against the white landscape. Children turned to look back, and parents pulled their heads away. The commander did not give new orders. There was nothing left to say. The decision had already burned its way through the hearts of everyone who stayed long enough to strike a match. When the Soviets arrived the next morning, the air still shimmered with heat. The village was gone, reduced to black skeletons of chimneys and the smell of ash. Footprints in the snow led west toward the forest. The soldiers walked among the ruins, kicking at embers that refused to die. They found no food, no shelter, no victory, only emptiness. Farther down the road, Finnish rearguards watched from the tree line. One of them lowered his binoculars and said quietly that the smoke looked like home disappearing. Another answered that home would return when the enemy was gone. They waited until night, then melted back into the woods. Behind them, the fire dimmed to a faint red glow beneath falling snow. In the weeks that followed, the story of Suomussalmi spread through the ranks like a whispered prayer. The soldiers began to call it the village that burned itself. To them, it became proof that this war was not about land or borders, but about the refusal to surrender even a roof or a chair to occupation. Each man carried that image with him, a reminder of what was at stake. When they dug trenches in the frozen earth, they thought of the flames licking across wooden beams. When they lit campfires, they saw again the faces of people walking away from their homes without looking back. Years later, those who survived would return to the ruins and rebuild. But on that winter night, as the snow turned red from reflected firelight, no one believed in tomorrow. The wind carried the smoke across the lake, spreading it like a signal to the world. A small nation was burning itself to live. In one of the last houses to catch fire, a diary lay open on a table. The ink had frozen before the page could be finished. The final line read, "If they take the village, let them find only ashes." When the flames reached the paper, the words disappeared, but the meaning remained in the hearts of those who left. They would keep walking, following the glow on the horizon until it faded behind them. And even then, the memory would stay warm and painful, like the last ember of a home that refused to die quietly. The forest along the Raatte Road is a place of ghosts. Trees rise so close together that the wind cannot pass between them without making a sound like whispering voices. Snow lies in deep drifts, broken only by a narrow ribbon of frozen mud that serves as the road. It is here that the Soviet 44th Division begins to move, a long column of men, tanks, and trucks stretching farther than the eye can see. Engines growl. Headlights cut faint tunnels through the swirling snow. They believe the road will take them west to victory. It will take them somewhere else entirely. Ahead, hidden in the woods, Finnish soldiers wait. They are few, no more than a handful, compared to the mass coming toward them. Their commander studies the road through binoculars and sees not an army, but an opportunity. The snow itself will be their ally. He whispers a single word, "Cut." The men nod and vanish into the trees. As the column advances, the forest seems to close behind it. The first ambush hits at dawn. Explosions tear through the front trucks, blocking the path. Machine guns rake the lead vehicles. Horses scream as they fall. The Soviet troops scramble for cover, but find none. The sides of the road are walls of snow too deep to climb. Every sound echoes between the trees, amplified until confusion becomes terror. Officers shout conflicting orders. Radios fail. Within minutes, the great column is no longer an army, but a trapped animal thrashing against its own body. From every direction, fire rains down. Finnish ski troops move like shadows, striking lava, vanishing, striking again. They cut the road into pieces, each section isolated from the next. The Soviets dig in where they stand, forming small circles of defense around their vehicles. Fires are forbidden, but the cold does not care about orders. Men freeze where they sit. Those who try to flee stumble into the forest and do not return. Night comes early. The sky glows faintly green with northern light, painting the snow in eerie colors. The Finns move silently between pockets of the trapped column. Their breath forms clouds that drift over the enemy positions like smoke. In one clearing, a Soviet medic kneels beside a wounded man. The bandage freezes to his hands. He looks up and sees figures gliding across the snow toward him. By the time he raises his weapon, they are gone. Only the echo of their skis remains. Days pass in chaos. Ammunition runs out. Horses are eaten. Engines are stripped for fuel to keep small fires alive. The dead are used as walls against the wind. The men stop counting the hours. They wait for the next attack, knowing it will come, knowing they cannot stop it. The sound of gunfire becomes distant, then fades altogether. The forest finishes what the bullets began. When silence finally returns, the Raatte Road lies buried beneath broken vehicles and the frozen forms of thousands. Smoke curls upward from the last fires, twisting into the cold sky, like a signal no one will ever answer. Finnish soldiers walk among the wrecks, stepping carefully over the bodies. One of them bends to pick up a fallen enemy's rifle, then stops and covers the man's face with snow. He says quietly that no one deserves to die this far from home. The others say nothing. They keep walking. By evening, the wind has filled the road again, covering tracks, softening edges. The forest swallows the evidence of battle. From above, the land looks untouched, white and calm. Only those who were there will remember the truth, that courage and cold can crush an emperor if given enough time. The rest will hear the story and call it legend. They will call it the Raatte Road, the place where an army vanished into the snow and the trees kept their secret. The forest no longer smells of pine. It smells of smoke, metal, and desperation. What remains of the Soviet regiments that once marched down the Raatte Road now sits scattered among the trees, huddled around fires that no longer warm. The men's faces are gray, their eyes hollowed by cold and hunger. They chew at frozen bread that breaks teeth and scrape frost from the edges of ration cans for water. Their officers walk among them, repeating promises no one believes. In one of the camps, a commander reads a message from headquarters. It orders another advance. He looks at the paper for a long time, then folds it and places it in his pocket. He tells his men that reinforcements are coming, that food will arrive tomorrow. The word tomorrow tastes bitter in his mouth. He has learned that tomorrow is just another form of punishment. A few hours later, he finds two soldiers crouched beside a crate meant for medical supplies. Inside are tins of meat taken from the officer's reserve. The men look up in silence, faces wet with fear and guilt. He should arrest them, make an example. But something inside him breaks. He walks away. The punishment will come from the cold soon enough. By nightfall, discipline unravels. Men steal from each other, trade bullets for food, coats for bread. Some wander into the darkness and never return. The snow around the camp is filled with footprints that lead nowhere. When morning comes, the drifts are smooth again, as if the forest has erased their shame. Farther north, a detachment tries to regroup. Their radio crackles with static. The voice on the other end demands progress, demands courage. The officer listening almost laughs. He stares at the men sleeping beside the fire and knows they cannot even stand. One of them mutters in his sleep, calling for his mother. The officer looks away. He has forgotten his own mother's face. As supplies vanish, suspicion grows. Someone whispers that the quartermaster has hidden food. They drag him from his tent, searching through his belongings until they find nothing. In the morning, he is gone, his footprints leading east. The men pretend not to notice. No one speaks his name again. Then comes the final betrayal. An officer tries to flee with a small group, taking the last working truck. The engine roars, tires spinning on ice. Men run after him, shouting, firing into the dark. The vehicle vanishes down the road and never returns. Hours later, scouts find it overturned in a ditch riddled with bullets. Inside lie the bodies of those who tried to escape. The officer's pistol is still in his hand. The betrayal has come full circle. When the sun rises, it reveals a camp without order. Smoke drifts from small fires built from broken crates and rifle stocks. The survivors sit motionless, too weak to move, too proud to surrender. They no longer look like soldiers. They look like relics of a world that forgot them. One man begins to sing softly, a lullaby from home. The tune falters, then fades into the wind. That afternoon, the sound of engines approaches. Reinforcements. At last, they think. But the shapes that emerge from the forest are not allies. Finnish ski troops glide across the snow, rifles raised. The starving men barely lift their weapons. Some drop them without a fight. The circle closes, swift and merciless. When it is over, the Finnish commander walks through the camp and sees what hunger has done. He orders his men to bury the dead and feed the living. They share bread taken from their own packs. The prisoners eat in silence, hands shaking. There is no victory here, only survival measured in hours. In the distance, the wind rises again, carrying the smell of smoke and something darker. The forest has seen this before. It will see it again. Hunger, betrayal, and the silence that follows both easy. The road south of Suomussalmi has become a graveyard of machines. Trucks and tanks sit half buried in snow, their engines dead, their metal skins glazed with frost. A few still carry the faint smell of oil and smoke, ghosts of motion in a land that no longer moves. The Soviet 44th Division once called this road their lifeline. Now it is only a frozen scar across the forest, winding through silence. The soldiers trapped along it have stopped counting the days. They huddle in small clusters inside shattered vehicles, lighting fires from the splinters of crates. The heat lasts minutes before the cold takes it back. Their breath fogs the windows, leaving shapes that melt and return again, with each sigh. Hunger has worn them thin. Their faces are pale as wax, eyes dull from sleepless nights. Somewhere behind them, the sound of skis whispers through the trees. They pretend not to hear it. The Finnish units know patience better than pity. They move like shadows, circling the convoy, cutting it into piece. At night, they strike the outer camps, firing short bursts before vanishing into the dark. Each attack feels less like a battle and more like an execution carried out by the landscape itself. The Soviets fire wildly into the woods. Bullets strike bark and vanish into snowing. The woods answer with silence. A lieutenant tries to organize a breakout. He gathers his men, promises them the road ahead is clear. They march for an hour before the first shell lands among them. The blast scatters the column like leaves. When the smoke clears, the survivors find themselves back where they started. The road has become a circle, the forest a labyrinth that allows no exit. The lieutenant sits down in the snow and does not rise again. As the temperature falls, the dead freeze where they lie. The living use their bodies as walls against the wind. No one speaks of it. They only sit closer to the fires and stare into the flames. The light dances across faces hollowed by frostbite. Somewhere, a harmonica begins to play, soft and uncertain. The tune is broken halfway through, replaced by coughing that never stops. When morning comes, the Finnish forces move in. Their white uniforms make them part of the snow itself. They strike from both sides of the road, precise and methodical. The trapped soldiers raise hands that barely tremble. Some fight out of instinct, others not at all. Within hours, the shooting stops. The convoy is silent. What was once an army has become a still life, painted in gray and white. Later, Finnish soldiers walk between the wrecks, counting prisoners, covering bodies with tarps torn from trucks. They find letters frozen inside coat pockets, words that will never be sent. One reads, "We are marching through a land made of ice and sorrow." Another simply says, "Tell them I was cold." The men who find these letters do not read them aloud. They fold them carefully and tuck them back where they were found. By dusk the wind returns, sweeping snow across the road. The outlines of tanks and trucks fade. The forest closes over the evidence, erasing the path that led here. From above, the land looks peaceful, white and untouched, as if the war has ended. But beneath that white surface lies 1,000 silent witnesses waiting for spring to thaw them back into memory. Somewhere beyond the trees, a Finnish officer writes in his log that the operation is complete. He adds no description, no numbers, no emotion, only the date and a single sentence. The road is clear. He closes the book and listens to the wind move through the pines. It sounds like the low moan of something too large to name. Dawn comes slow to the Mannerheim Line. The ski turns gray, then white, then gray again. Light has no strength here. It falls over the trenches like ash, settling on helmets, rifles, and the frozen sandbags that line the parapets. The men rise from their shallow sleep and begin another day of waiting. They know the Soviets will come. They always do. The rhythm of the war has become predictable. Bombardment, violence, assault, retreat. Yet somehow, the line still stands. Inside a command bunker, a map lies pinned to the wall. The paper has torn along its edges from use. Pencils mark positions that shift daily, like the tide. A young officer reports that the northern sectors are holding. The western flank is thin, but intact. The commander listens and nods. He lights a cigarette and studies the faint lines drawn across the isthmus. Every inch of that map represents men he will never meet, but will still lose. Outside, the artillery begins again. Shells land in slow succession, shaking frost from the ceiling of the dugout. The men hunch deeper into their coats. A radio crackles with static and fragments of distant voices. Orders are passed along the trenches by hand, because no one trusts the wires anymore. They carry the messages folded in the same paper they used to write home. Most of those letters will never leave this place. By midday, the bombardment stops. Snow drifts down, muffling the echoes. Through the haze, dark shapes emerge. Soviet infantry advance in waves, moving between bursts of smoke. Machine guns open fire from concealed nests. The air fills with the smell of cordite and frozen earth. The Finns fire until the barrels glow, then switch positions, disappearing into tunnels that connect bunker to bunker. The line bends under the pressure, but does not break. In one sector, a machine gun crew runs out of ammunition. The gunner looks at his assistant and laughs softly. The sound is almost gentle. They pull back to a second line, where new belts of bullets wait, still warm from the fires lit inside the shelter. They return to their post and continue firing until the snow around them turns gray from smoke. By afternoon, the attack falters. The surviving Soviets retreat across the open ground, dragging their wounded. The Finns watch them go, too exhausted to cheer. The commander walks the trench, stepping carefully over debris. He tells his men they did well. His voice is calm, even kind. When he turns away, his shoulders sag. He knows another attack will come tomorrow, or the next day, or the one after that. The pattern will repeat until one side runs out of men. As night falls, violence returns. Fires are lit in barrels. The men gather around them, holding their hands to the warmth. Someone begins to hum a song too quiet to recognize. Others join in. The tune drifts along the trench, carried by the wind. For a moment, it sounds almost like peace. In his field journal, the commander writes that the line is holding. He adds nothing else. He closes the book and listens to the crackle of the fires. Above the trench, the northern lights shimmer faintly, pale green ribbons across a black sky. The men look up at them, each seeing something different: home, memory, or the faces of those already gone. The lights fade and darkness returns, but the feeling lingers. The line has not fallen. Not yet. When the shooting stops, the forest does not celebrate. It exhales slowly, releasing clouds of mist from the trees. The silence that follows a battle is heavier than noise. It fills the air like smoke, pressing against the ears until men begin to whisper, just to hear something human again. Across the line, both armies pause to count what is left of them. In this pause, the forest reveals its new shape, a field of white, broken by dark mounds that were not there before. Finnish patrols move among the bodies, their skis gliding over frozen ground. They speak softly, marking positions, gathering the living from the dead. The smell of powder has faded, replaced by something colder. A medic kneels beside a fallen comrade and brushes snow from his face. The expression is peaceful, almost ordinary, as if he had only paused to rest. The medic whispers his name once, then covers him again. Everywhere, the signs of struggle remain. Shattered helmets hang from branches like ornaments. Rifles stick upright from the snow, bayonets catching the dim light. The ground is pocked with shell craters, now filled with ice. Each one holds a small pond of frozen water that reflects the pale sky. It looks beautiful until you remember why it is there. In one corner of the woods, a burial detail works in silence. The ground is too hard to dig deep, so they lay the bodies side by side and cover them with logs and snow. A chaplain stands nearby, reading from a book that the wind keeps trying to close. His voice trembles, but does not break. He ends each prayer the same way, not with amen, but with thank you. The soldiers nod and move to the next grave. On the other side of the front, Soviet soldiers perform the same ritual. They drag their dead back through the snow, muttering to each other in low voices. They do not look up. They have learned that the forest watches. When a wolf howls in the distance, one of them spits into the snow and says it is calling for the souls of the fallen. No one laughs. By afternoon, the wind rises again. Snow drifts across the open ground, smoothing the edges of everything. Trenches, footprints, and craters vanish under a new white sheet. The world erases its own memory. The men know that by morning, the forest will look untouched, and no one passing through will guess how many lives ended here. The thought brings no comfort. That night, fires burn low. The soldiers sit close together, staring at the glow. Someone says the dead are lucky. They no longer feel the cold. No one answers. They all know it is true. In the flickering light, their faces look carved from wood. The wind outside moans through the trees, sounding almost like voices rising in song. The living pretend not to hear it. At the edge of the camp, the commander writes a report. He keeps his words brief. Heavy casualties. Positions maintained. Morale holding. He pauses before the last line, then adds a sentence he will later erase. The forest is full of graves. He stares at it for a moment, then scratches it out and closes the book. Before sleeping, he walks to the tree line and looks out across the snow. The moonlight reveals faint mounds stretching into the distance, each marked by a helmet, a stick, a shadow. He whispers to no one, telling them that their sacrifice will be remembered. The words vanish into the cold. Behind him, the fire cracks once, like the sound of a rifle far away. In the morning, snow will cover them all again. The war will continue. But for now, the forest stands silent, keeping its secrets beneath the white. In Moscow, winter feels different. The snow here falls soft and slow, not in the violent sheets that bury the front. It lands on the roofs of government buildings and melts into gray slush before noon. Inside those buildings, maps are spread across polished tables. Men in uniforms trace lines with gloved fingers, pretending the cold outside does not concern them. For them, the war is not a landscape of frozen forests, but a puzzle of numbers and distance. The reports arriving from Finland are grim. Entire divisions gone. Commanders missing. Supply lines collapsed. The official language softens the reality, calling the failures temporary setbacks. The phrase repeats itself through corridors, passed from office to office like a talisman against humiliation. The truth is harder to erase. Stalin reads each report in silence, his face expressionless. When he speaks, it is to ask the only question that matters. How do we fix this? The answer comes from a soldier who knows failure too well. Semyon Timoshenko, broad-shouldered, gray-eyed. His voice steady enough to carry through the fear that fills the room. He does not promise miracles. He promises organization, reinforcements, discipline, the removal of those too weak to command. His words cut through the stale air like a knife. Stalin listens, then nods once. The empire will reinvent itself under new hands. Within days, trains begin to move. Steel wheels grind against frozen tracks carrying men, tanks, and ammunition north. The factories of Leningrad and Moscow light up again, smoke rising through the fog. The failures of December are rewritten as lessons. The army is reshaped with brutal efficiency. Officers are recalled, interrogated, replaced. Entire regiments vanish from the rosters, erased not by death, but by decree. The machine that had stumbled now learns to run again, fed by fear and iron. On the Karelian front, the soldiers can feel the change before they see it. The shelling grows heavier, the uniforms newer, the rhythm more precise. Rumors spread of a new commander, one who does not tolerate hesitation. Prisoners captured by Finnish patrols speak of endless drills, of threats whispered by political officers who stand behind every firing line. They say the army no longer bleeds freely. It bleeds inward, into itself. Far behind the lines, in Helsinki, the Finnish command listens to intercepted transmissions. The patterns are different now. The chaos that once filled Soviet communications has been replaced by order. Each message ends with the same coded affirmation: forward always. The Finnish commander studies the signals and knows what it means. The storm is coming back stronger. The empire has remembered how to breathe. In Moscow, a celebration is held quietly, without champagne or banners. The generals drink tea that tastes of smoke and bitterness. They speak of new offensives, of honor to be restored, of a line that will finally break. Outside, the snow begins to fall again, heavier this time, as if the weather itself were preparing for the second act. When the meeting ends, Timoshenko steps into the hallway. The light flickers overhead. He pauses beside a window, looking out at the city buried in pale fog. Somewhere out there, thousands of men are already on trains heading north to a land they do not know. He touches the glass and feels the cold through it. In that moment, he understands that reinvention is only another word for sacrifice. On the front, the first shells of the renewed campaign land, with a sound like thunder rolling across ice. The men in the trenches lift their heads, listening. They know this is not the same enemy they faced before. This one has learned from failure. This one will not stop. The empire has reinvented itself, and its rebirth begins in fire. It begins before dawn, when the world is still half asleep. The first shells arrive without warning, streaking through the fog like falling stars that forgot their purpose. The explosions come seconds later, shaking the frozen ground. Men wake in their bunks reaching for rifles that cannot stop thunder. The bombardment has begun, and it will not stop for hours. The sky flashes white, then orange, then black again. Every few moments, the air itself seems to collapse, pressing against the chest until breathing feels like drowning. The Finnish soldiers huddle in their bunkers, counting the seconds between impacts. Some pray, some simply listen. Each blast carries a name they do not yet know, a message written in smoke and fire. The snow outside turns gray with soot. The Mannerheim Line trembles. Logs splinter, sandbags burst, and the narrow tunnels fill with dust. A young private wipes his face and laughs without sound. He tells the man beside him that he thought the world was ending. And maybe it is. His voice is lost beneath another detonation. When the shaking stops, he opens his eyes and finds the roof still above him. He thanks no one in particular. Outside, the landscape changes shape with every explosion. Hills flatten, trees vanish, and the air fills with fragments of what used to be Earth. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of engines joins the chorus. Tanks wait for the storm to clear before they move forward. The artillery lays the path for them, erasing everything in its way. A strategy as old as empire, written now in snow and fire. Inside the trenches, time dissolves. Minutes stretch into hours. The soldiers mark the passing of the bombardment by the collapse of each section of wall. A man digs with bare hands to free a comrade buried under dirt and ice. When he finally pulls him free, the man is smiling. He says he was dreaming of summer. No one answers Ollie. The next shell lands close enough to throw them both against the wall. By midday, the bombardment shifts direction. The shells march down the line like a slow drumbeat. The rhythm becomes hypnotic. Men begin to laugh at strange moments, unable to stop. One officer walks through the trench, repeating a single phrase, hold the line, until the words lose meaning and become sound. The soldiers nod even though they cannot hear him over the roar. When the shelling finally ends, the silence feels wrong. The absence of noise is heavier than the noise itself. Ears ring, mouths move without words. The world smells of metal and sweat. Snow falls again, slow and deliberate, covering the craters still steaming from the heat. From beyond the haze, voices rise, the Soviets shouting orders, preparing to advance. The bombardment was not the attack, it was only the breath before it. A Finnish lieutenant crawls out of his bunker and looks over the edge. The landscape is unrecognizable, a sea of holes and shattered wood. He cannot find the markers that once divided the sectors. He whispers that the line is gone. A sergeant beside him shakes his head and says, "Not yet." They raise their rifles and wait for the shadows to appear through the smoke. Far behind them, at headquarters, the commander listens to the faint tremor, still echoing through the ground. He closes his eyes and imagines the shells falling one by one, the noise stacking on itself until it becomes pure vibration. He knows that when the enemy finally moves, they will find survivors waiting among the ruins. The line may break, but the will of those within it will not. The bombardment ends as suddenly as it began. The wind shifts. The forest exhales smoke and silence together. Somewhere, a bird calls once and is answered by nothing. The men look at each other in disbelief. They have survived the storm. For now. When the attack comes, it comes from everywhere at once. The snow has barely settled over the craters when the first waves of Soviet infantry appear. Dark shapes, moving through the smoke. Behind them, tanks grind forward, their tracks crushing the frozen earth into powder. The Finnish defenders fire until their guns burn their hands, then reload and fire again. The air fills with a constant metallic roar that drowns out thought. The bombardment was only the prelude. This is the opera of destruction. The Mannerheim Line, already risky and bleeding, begins to break. Bunkers that survived the shelling now shudder under direct hits. One collapses in on itself, swallowing the men inside. Another catches fire. The smell of burning wood mixes with cordite and oil. Commanders shout for reinforcements that no longer exist. The runners carrying the messages never return. Communication dissolves into chaos. At one sector, near a place once called Suma, a group of soldiers fight to hold a trench that no longer resembles a trench. The walls have caved in, and the snow inside is red. They pass ammunition by hand, calm in the way only exhausted men can be. One of them mutters that the enemy will not take this ground while he still breathes. Moments later, a shell lands behind him. The others keep firing. Through the smoke, the Soviets push forward. They move over the fallen, stepping through the gaps where the line has fractured. Their voices rise in shouts that sound almost triumphant. For the first time in months, they can see open ground beyond the fortifications. The Finnish gunners pull back to secondary positions, firing as they go. The breach widens with every passing minute. The unbreakable wall has finally given way. In a nearby command post, a messenger bursts in, face pale. He says the right flank is gone. The commander looks at the map and traces the path of the collapse with his finger. He asks how many men remain in the center. The answer does not matter. He knows what comes next. He writes one sentence in his notebook. We hold as long as we can. Then he tears the page out and hands it to the messenger. Take it to headquarters. When the boy hesitates, he adds quietly, run fast. Outside, the tanks reach the first Finnish line of mines. Explosions lift them into the air. Those that survive crawl forward on fire, smoke streaming from their hatches. Infantry follow, stepping over wrecks, firing blindly into the haze. The sound is continuous, an unending drumbeat of metal on the earth. The defenders fight from crater to crater, trading ground for breath. Each meter gained costs lives that cannot be replaced. By afternoon, the breach is undeniable. Soviet flags rise over the ruins of the outer defense. The snow beneath them is black with ash. The surviving Finns fall back toward the interim line, moving through forests that glow faintly with the reflection of burning bunkers. The sky above them turns the color of iron. One officer stops to look back. The Mannerheim Line, the shield of Finland, is disappearing into smoke. He whispers that they built it to last 100 years, and it has lasted 2 months. He does not say it with bitterness. He says it with awe. Then he turns and follows his men into the trees. At dusk, the wind shifts, carrying the distant sound of victory songs from the Soviet camps. They believe the war is nearly over. In their minds, the breach is the end. But for those retreating through the snow, it is only another beginning. The line may be broken, but the fight will continue along every frozen road and forest path until there is no one left to stand. That night, the surviving soldiers dig shallow trenches in the interim line. They work in silence, their faces lit by the flicker of burning fuel dumps far behind them. One man says the enemy is close. Another answers that close is good. It means they will not need to waste bullets finding them. They finish their work and wait for morning. The breach has been made, but the heart of the defense still beats beneath the snow. When the order finally comes, it is spoken softly, almost like a confession. Fall back. No one argues. The men have known for hours that the line is lost. They begin to move before the words even reach them, gathering what remains of their gear and stepping away from the ruins that once felt like safety. Snow drifts through the trenches as if the earth itself were trying to cover the evidence. The retreat is not a march. It is a slow unwinding through the forest, a line of shadows moving between the trees. The men carry their wounded on sleds made from doors torn off bunkers. Each step crunches underfoot, loud in the silence that follows battle. Behind them, the sky glows faintly red, where the forts are still burning. The air smells of smoke and metal. The sound of artillery fades with distance, but never disappears entirely. It is the heartbeat of something too large to escape. Along the way, they pass villages already abandoned. The windows are broken, doors swinging in the wind. A few dogs wander among the ruins, their paws leaving trails in the snow. The soldiers throw them scraps of bread, and another time It might have felt like mercy. Now it is habit. The world has narrowed to small gestures of survival. In the rear guard, a young lieutenant walks backward, rifle raised, watching the tree line for movement. He thinks he sees shapes between the pines, but cannot tell if they are enemies or his own imagination. The forest has begun to play tricks on everyone. Every gust of wind sounds like footsteps, every falling branch like a rifle bolt being drawn. Fear becomes part of the landscape, as natural as snow. At a crossroads, the column stops. A group of engineers sets charges under a bridge. The commander waits until the last wagon crosses, then nods. The explosion tears through the morning calm, sending shards of ice into the air. The bridge collapses into the frozen river. The men watch it fall without cheering. They know it will only slow the enemy, not stop him. The road ahead is long and narrow, winding through valleys that seem endless. Some of the soldiers begin to hum under their breath, an old marching song now stripped of rhythm. The melody falters with each breath of cold air. They do not sing to lift spirits, but to remind themselves that they still exist. Each verse fades into the next until it becomes a whisper carried by the wind. By nightfall, they reach new positions. The trenches here are shallow, the bunkers unfinished. They dig with shovels, with helmets, with bare hands when the tools break. Frost forms on their sleeves, glittering under the moonlight. One man looks up and says the stars seem brighter tonight. Another answers that perhaps the sky feels pity. The first man laughs, a sound too dry to be joy. Behind them, the horizon still burns. The light flickers through the trees like a memory refusing to hide. The Mannerheim Line is gone, but its echo remains in every heartbeat of those who held it. The commander writes in his notebook that the line did not fall, it moved. He closes the book and stares into the dark. Somewhere beyond the hills, the Soviets are already rebuilding their strength. The next attack will come soon. He can feel it in the air, sharp as the cold. As the men settle into their new trenches, snow begins to fall again. It covers helmets, rifles, and the faces of those too tired to brush it away. The world becomes quiet, blank, forgiving for a moment. The retreat is complete, but the war has not ended. They have simply traded one graveyard for another. The new line is not built. It is scraped from the earth by hands that have forgotten warmth. The men arrive under a sky the color of iron, dragging tools, wounded, and silence. The trenches here are shallow, traced hastily across open ground. There are no bunkers, no reinforced walls, only snow piled high enough to stop the wind. Yet they dig. They dig, because there is nowhere else to go. The order comes down from headquarters. Establish positions, hold at all costs. No one asks how. They build firing points from logs cut in the frozen forest, carve niches for rifles, and melt snow in helmets for water. At night, they sleep sitting upright, rifles in their arms like children. The sound of artillery echoes in the distance, steady and unending. The front is quiet, but the quiet feels temporary, like breath drawn before a scream. Each morning, the soldiers rise before the light. They check their weapons, clear the barrels of frost, and stare into the mist. The Soviets are out there somewhere, regrouping. Sometimes they hear engines rumbling far beyond the tree line. Sometimes they see nothing for hours. The waiting becomes its own kind of torture. Patience freezes into dread. A small fire burns in a dugout where officers meet. Maps are spread across the dirt floor, ink blurring from moisture. The commander points at the thin blue line drawn across the page. This, he says, is all that stands between us and the capital. The men nod. No one asks how long it must hold. They know the answer is always the same. Until we cannot. The villagers who fled south leave behind food and tools. The soldiers find jars of pickled vegetables buried under snow, bread hard as stone. and bundles of letters that will never be sent. One letter begins, "I hear the guns at night and dream that the forest walks." Another ends abruptly, the ink frozen mid-word. They read these messages aloud around the fire, as if the voices of the absent might lend them strength. Days pass without assault, but the tension never lifts. Men speak less, eat less, and begin to look like parts of the landscape. Their uniforms fade into the snow, their faces etched with frost. They are no longer soldiers or farmers or sons. They are defenders of a line that exists mostly in imagination. Still, imagination is enough. At dusk, patrols return with news that the enemy has begun to mass again. Columns of smoke rise beyond the hills. The scouts describe hundreds of tanks, thousands of men. The commander listens and says only that they will come here next. He does not shout. His calm frightens the men more than any order could. That night, snow falls heavier than before. It buries the trenches, erases footprints, muffles the sound of movement. The men dig themselves free by moonlight. One jokes that nature is helping them fortify the line. No one laughs, but for a moment, the thought feels comforting. If the world insists on burying them, at least it is gentle about it. When dawn returns, a thin fog blankets the field. Through it, the soldiers can see the distant glow of fires beyond the horizon. The enemy is coming. The men grip their rifles tighter, not because they expect victory, but because holding something slayed keeps them human. Behind them lies the burned map of their homeland. Ahead, the unknown. Between them, this narrow strip of frozen earth that will soon be called the interim line. At Taipale, the river no longer looks like water. It has turned to glass, thick and white, stretching between the Finnish trenches and the Soviet guns. The ice reflects the smoke of the burning forests, creating an illusion of fire frozen in time. Every man who stands here knows that the next attack will come across that river. Every man also knows he is unlikely to see another dawn. The first shells fall just after sunrise. They strike the opposite bank, sending shards of ice into the air. The Finnish soldiers brace for the assault they can feel approaching. From across the frozen plain comes the low hum of engines, followed by the steady rhythm of boots. Dark figures appear on the horizon, growing larger with each step. The river groans beneath their weight. Machine guns open fire. The first wave drops instantly, bodies scattering across the ice like broken marionettes. The second wave hesitates, then presses forward. The air fills with sound metal, wind, shouting, the sharp crack of rifles. The defenders fire until their shoulders ache, then reload and fire again. The barrels smoke in the cold. Steam rises from the river as blood meets frost. For hours, the assault continues. Soviet tanks attempt to cross on makeshift bridges. The ice buckles, swallowing them whole. Men dive from burning vehicles into freezing water, their screams muffled as the surface closes over them. Finnish artillery finds its mark again and again. When the smoke clears, the river looks alive, shifting under the weight of ruin. Yet more soldiers come. The attack does not stop. By midday, ammunition runs low. The Finnish commander sends word to conserve fire. The men obey, counting each bullet as if it were a prayer. The enemy reaches the near shore once, twice, only to be driven back each time. At one point, the Soviets raise a red banner above the ice. It flutters for less than a minute before a single shot cuts it down. The silence that follows is brief, but feels eternal. In the trenches, a medic works with frozen fingers, bandaging wounds that will never truly heal. He moves from man to man, speaking softly. When asked how long they can hold, he answers, "As long as the river holds us." The others nod, too tired to question the meaning. Around them, the air smells of gunpowder and thawing snow. Above, the sky darkens to the color of bruised metal. The final attack comes at dusk. Artillery lights the horizon. The river explodes into geysers of smoke and fire. For a moment, it seems the entire world is breaking apart. But when the dust settles, the line is still there. The soldiers stand knee-deep in snow, their faces streaked with soot and ice. The enemy retreats again, leaving behind silence, broken only by the crackle of distant flames. When night falls, the men walk the riverbank. They find wrecks half submerged, rifles frozen into the ice, and helmets glinting in the faint moonlight. One soldier bends to pick up a photograph lying on the surface. It shows a family smiling in summer. He slips it into his coat without a word. Another man begins to hum a tune that sounds like morning and hope at once. The next morning, the river is quiet again. The ice has sealed its wounds, smooth and white. The enemy is gone for now. The soldiers rest against the trench walls, drinking melted snow from tin cups. A message arrives from headquarters. Hold your ground. The commander smiles bitterly. He looks out at the frozen plain and murmurs, "The ground is holding us." At Taipale, the line has not moved. Against every rule of war and reason, it stands. The men who guard it know this is not victory, only survival measured in hours. But for a small nation on the edge of the world, hours are enough. The morning begins with thunder that has no sky. Artillery shells roll across the frozen fields, shaking the air until breath itself feels dangerous. The soldiers at Suma and Molahan know what the sound means. The Soviets are coming again. But this time the storm does not stop. It deepens, layer upon layer. A sound so constant that silence becomes unimaginable. The men in the trenches cover their ears and wait for the ground to split. When the bombardment finally pauses, it is only to make room for the next act. Out of the smoke come waves of infantry, dark figures moving with mechanical rhythm. Behind them, tanks advance through the wreckage of their own fire, steel beasts crawling across ice and ash. The Finnish defenders rise from what is left of their fortifications and fire into the gray. The snow explodes around them. The air smells of burning fuel and blood. For hours the battle sways back and forth like a pendulum. Every meter of ground is fought over, lost, and fought for again. The bunkers that still stand are reduced one by one. In some, men fight until the walls collapse. In others, they are buried alive when the roofs cave in. The line bends, cracks, and finally begins to tear apart. There is no longer a front, only pockets of resistance surrounded by noise. In the command post, the telephone rings without pause. Reports blur together, positions gone, ammunition gone, entire units gone. The commander listens, eyes fixed on the map. The lines he once drew so carefully are meaningless now. The enemy has poured through them, like water through broken glass. He orders a withdrawal to the interim line, his voice steady though his hands tremble. When he hangs up, he looks at his staff and says quietly, "It lasted longer than anyone believed it could." Outside, snow drifts down in thick sheets, mixing with smoke until the world turns the color of dusk. The defenders move through it like ghosts, carrying what they can, leaving behind what they must. They pass the ruins of the fortifications they built with their own hands. Some pause to touch the walls, as if saying farewell to something sacred. Then they move on. Behind them, the Soviets raise their flags over shattered bunkers. Officers pose for photographs, smiles sharp and small. They call it victory. The men who fought here know better. What stands now is rubble, and rubble has a way of swallowing triumph. Even as the banners rise, the ground beneath them burns from buried munitions still cooking in the frost. By evening, the Finnish rearguard sets fire to supply depots before retreating. Flames climb high, reflecting in the snow like rivers of light. The sky glows red for miles. From above, Pilots report that the entire line appears to be on fire. It is true. The Mannerheim Line, the wall that held the empire at bay for months, is burning itself to ash. In the darkness that follows, the men gather on the road leading north. They rest against trees too tired to speak. One soldier removes his helmet and places it on the ground beside him. He says the line was never stone or steel. It was us. No one disagrees. They watch the horizon until the flames fade and the snow begins to fall again, gentle and slow. Somewhere far behind them, a final explosion marks the end. The last bunker gives way, collapsing into the earth. The sound echoes across the frozen lakes, rolling toward the sea. The Mannerheim Line is gone, but the spirit that built it marches on through the night, cold, hungry, unbroken. The city of Viipuri stands at the edge of a frozen bay, a maze of stone streets and narrow alleys, now filled with soldiers instead of citizens. The church bells have been silent for weeks. Smoke drifts from chimneys that no longer warm homes, but serve as signals to artillery gunners. Every building is a fortress. Every window a firing slit. The people who remain live underground, huddled in cellars with candles that burn faster than hope. The siege begins quietly. The first shells land in the northern district, shaking the dust from rooftops. Then comes the second wave, and the third, until the sound becomes constant. The streets vanish beneath debris. Glass falls like snow from shattered windows. A statue in the main square loses its head, but remains standing. An accidental monument to endurance. Finnish soldiers move through the ruins with practiced caution. They know each block, each stairwell, each broken wall. They set ambushes in hallways, wait behind collapsed doorways, and disappear through tunnels that connect basements to the sewers. The Soviets advance methodically, house by house, their T-tanks grinding over rubble. The city shrinks with each passing day, its boundaries marked by smoke and silence. Inside a cellar near the harbor, a radio operator listens to static. He writes down fragments of messages that fade before they finish. Reinforcements delayed. Hold until relieved. He tears the paper into smaller pieces and feeds them into the fire. The flames flare blue for a moment, then die. Outside, the sound of heavy guns shakes the walls. Dust falls onto his hair like ash. In the hospital, once a school, nurses move between rows of stretchers. There is no medicine left, only bandages and snow melted for water. One nurse hums softly to keep herself from crying. When the lights flicker and go out, she continues to hum in the dark. A soldier on a nearby bed whispers that the song reminds him of home. She does not answer. The word home has lost its meaning here. By evening, the Soviets reach the railway station. The defenders pull back toward the cathedral, using the frozen canals as firing lines. The city burns in circles, new fires igniting before old ones fade. Smoke hangs low, mixing with fog from the bay. The air tastes of salt and ash. Somewhere in the distance, a church organ begins to play. A single deep note that trembles through the chaos. No one knows who is playing or why. The sound lasts less than a minute before another shell ends it. As night falls, the snow returns. It covers the wreckage, softening the edges of destruction. The soldiers move through the drifts, silhouettes against the glow of fire. One of them stops to carve a cross into a wall with his knife. Another writes a name beneath it. They do not speak. There is no need. The city itself has become a prayer whispered between explosions. When dawn arrives, the horizon is red again. The Soviets push forward through the suburbs, their numbers endless. The defenders fight from the ruins, using every corner as cover. Ammunition runs low. Food is gone, but they refuse to leave. The commander walks among them, his coat torn, his voice hoarse. He tells them that as long as they hold Viipuri, Finland lives. They nod and return to their posts. From the bay, Artillery shells arc over the water, landing in the center of the city. The shockwaves rattle the windows that still exist. Each blast erases another piece of history. Yet through it all, the Finnish flag continues to fly above the courthouse. Torn, blackened, but still there. It flutters in the wind until night falls again, hiding it from sight. In the darkness, the soldiers light small fires inside empty rooms. They warm their hands and listen to the distant echo of tanks moving through the streets. One man says that the city is dying. Another answers that some deaths are not defeat, only memory made visible. Outside, the snow keeps falling, covering the ruins of Viipuri like a shroud. Night covers the bay in silver light. The sea has frozen so thick that it groans under its own weight. From the ruined city of Viipuri, lines of men begin to move across it, their boots echoing on the ice like native bells. The wind cuts through their coats, turning every breath into mist. Behind them, the city burns, its reflection stretching across the frozen water like veins of fire. They are leaving not in Triumph, but in Silences. The order is clear, he say. Retreat across the bay before dawn. The ice is unstable, the shelling unending, but the road of frozen water is their only path. Trucks move first, headlights covered, tires wrapped in chains. Each one creaks forward, carrying wounded and what remains of supplies. The sound of engines mixes with the moan of shifting ice. The men whisper to one another that the sea is alive and listening. No one raises his voice. Halfway across, the bombardment begins again. Shells whistle overhead and strike the ice behind them. Columns of water and steam erupt, freezing in mid-air before falling back in shards. The explosions echo for miles. Some men stumble and do not rise. Others drag them to the sleds, refusing to leave anyone behind. A medic wraps his coat around a wounded soldier and says the same words over and over. Keep walking, as if the repetition itself could hold the ice together. The wind carries the smell of smoke from the burning city. Even now, the fires refuse to die. The glow lights the faces of the men as they move farther out onto the bay. Behind them, Viipuri fades into a red blur. Ahead lies darkness. Somewhere beyond that darkness is the mainland and the promise of another line to defend. They march toward it like pilgrims crossing a frozen desert. One truck breaks through the ice. It happens without warning. A sudden crack, a scream, then the sound of water swallowing metal. The convoy halts. For a moment, no one moves. Then the commander waves his arm, signaling them forward. The road must stay alive, even if the sea devours part of it. The column stretches thinner, each man stepping into the prints of the one before him. The ice groans beneath their weight, but holds. Barely. Hours pass, the moon sinks behind the clouds, the horizon turns gray, hinting at morning. The first men reach the far shore and collapse onto the snow. Too cold to speak, too tired to celebrate. They look back across the bay and see the line of movement, still shimmering in the half-light, men and trucks and horses crossing a road made of ice and faith. The sight feels unreal, like a story told around a fire. By the time the last group arrives, the sun has risen. The ice road glitters behind them, littered with the dark shapes of what could not be saved. The commander stands at the edge, watching as cracks begin to spread through the frozen surface. Soon the sea will reclaim it, erasing the path as if it never existed. He removes his cap and bows his head, a gesture not of mourning, but of gratitude. The sea has let them pass. The soldiers move inland toward new defenses. They do not speak of the crossing. Some believe the ice itself chose who lived and who did not. Others prefer to think it was luck. Either way, the road is gone now, swallowed by the thaw that always follows fire. In history, it will be called a miracle. For those who walked it, It will always be something else night, when the world could have ended but did not. Far from the front, the war sounds different. In the corridors of foreign ministries, the thunder of artillery becomes the quiet tick of clocks. The air smells of ink and smoke from polished stoves instead of gunpowder. Men in heavy coats gather around tables covered with maps that still show cities which no longer exist. They speak softly, their voices echoing against the marble walls. Outside, snow falls against windows that have never known the vibration of shellfire. In Moscow, the Finnish delegation arrives before dawn. Their train has traveled through miles of frozen wilderness, past villages turned to ash. They step onto the platform with eyes that have seen too much. Waiting for them are officials in dark uniforms, polite but expressionless. No one mentions the war directly. They exchange greetings, as if meeting for trade, not surrender. The silence between words says more than diplomacy ever could. Inside the Kremlin, the negotiations begin. The table is long, the air heavy. The Soviet representatives speak first, listing their demands with the calm certainty of victors. Territory, bases, ports, excellence. The Finns listen without interruption. Their leader, Prime Minister Raatte, holds his pen between his fingers and waits until the voice across from him finishes. Then he asks how many men must die before the list becomes shorter. The translator hesitates, then repeats the question. The answer is a smile. Back in Helsinki, the government waits for word. Radios hiss with static. The city is dark to save power. Soldiers rest in their trenches, unaware that the outcome of their war is being written hundreds of miles away by men sitting in warmth. Every hour, a courier brings messages from the front: ammunition low, casualties high, positions uncertain. The ministers read them in silence, each knowing that the next message might make the decision for them. In Moscow, the Finns argue for days, though they know argument is theater. They ask to keep certain islands, certain towns, certain memories. Each request is denied. The Soviet delegates remain courteous, their tone almost friendly, as they dismantle the map of Finland piece by piece. At night, the Finnish delegation returns to their hotel. They eat in silence, staring at plates of food they cannot taste. Outside, the streets are empty except for soldiers shoveling snow. On the third night, a message arrives from Helsinki. The situation is collapsing. The line near Viipuri has fallen. The ice road is gone. The diplomats look at one another and understand that they are negotiating the terms of survival, not peace. Raatte writes in his notebook that the choice is between the death of a nation or the death of its borders. When he closes the book, his hand trembles for the first time. The final session lasts only an hour. Papers are signed, hands shaken. The Soviet representatives smile for the cameras. The Finns do not. When the photographs are developed later, the expressions tell the story better than any report. One side victorious, the other enduring. The signatures dry while men still fight and die in the snow. When the meeting ends, Raatte walks alone through the corridor. His footsteps echo against the stone floor. Outside, the wind has stopped. He looks up at the gray sky and thinks of the soldiers who will never hear the word peace. For them, the war will end in silence, not relief. He whispers something that no one else hears, a promise that Finland will live, even if smaller, even if wounded. Then he steps into the waiting car. Back at the front, the guns continue to fire. The soldiers do not yet know that their fate has been sealed in a room far away. The snow falls quietly, covering the trenches where they wait for orders that will never come. The war is ending, but none of them can feel it. The final day begins with wind. It sweeps through the ruins of Viipuri, carrying smoke and the faint echo of gunfire from the outskirts. The city no longer belongs to anyone. Streets that once led to markets and homes now end in rubble. The snow is black from ash. The few soldiers still guarding the central square know the truth that no order can hide. The ceasefire will come before night, and the city will be handed over. In the courtyard of the old courthouse, a small group gathers. The Finnish flag still flies above the roof, its edges burned, its color dulled by smoke. It has survived bombardments, fire, and wind. But not what is coming now. The commander stands at attention, his coat buttoned high, his eyes fixed on the flag. Around him, the men form a line, rifles slung, faces hidden beneath frost. They wait for a signal that none of them wants to give. The clock on the church tower strikes once. The sound echoes across the empty streets. The commander nods. A young soldier steps forward, hesitates, then climbs the stairs to the flagpole. His hands shake from cold and exhaustion. He unties the rope slowly, as if hoping something might stop him. The fabric flutters once more, then begins to fall. The men below remove their cuffs. No one speaks. The only sound is the whisper of cloth sliding through metal. When the flag reaches the ground, the soldier folds it carefully. The colors are faded, but the blue cross still shows beneath the soot. He holds it to his chest for a moment, before handing it to the commander. The older man takes it without a word, and tucks it under his arm. His eyes glisten, though the wind hides the tears. He turns to his men and says quietly, "It is time to go." They nod, shoulders straight, as if leaving a funeral. The convoy moves out through the northern gate. Trucks rumble over the frozen cobblestones, wheels crunching glass and ice. Civilians stand along the road, some crying, others too empty for emotion. A woman holds a child wrapped in a blanket, too thin for the cold. As the soldiers pass, she bows her head. One of them reaches down from the truck and tosses her his scarf. It lands at her feet, bright against the snow. She does not pick it up until the sound of engines fades. Behind them, the city remains quiet. The fires have burned out, leaving only smoke curling from collapsed roofs. The flagpole stands bare against the gray skiway. Soon, new banners will rise there, bright and unfamiliar. But for this brief moment, between departure and occupation, Viipuri belongs to no one. It is a city suspended between memory and loss. Outside the walls, the column halts on a hill overlooking the bay. The men turn to watch the city one last time. The commander unwraps the folded flag and holds it up. The wind catches it, and for an instant it flies again, ghost-like in the pale light. Then he lowers it and places it inside a wooden crate. No one cheers. No one salutes. They simply stand in silence, listening to the wind. A messenger rides up with news that the armistice has been signed. The war is over. The commander closes the crate and says, "For now." The men climb back into their trucks. The engines start, growling into life. As they drive away, snow begins to fall again, soft and relentless, erasing the tracks they leave behind. Far behind them, in the city they could not keep, a door swings open in the wind. Inside, a curtain moves, and the sound of a loose shutter taps against the wall, like a heartbeat, refusing to stop. The flag is gone, but its shadow still lies across the stones. The roads leading west are full before sunrise. Columns of sleds and carts stretch as far as the eye can see, winding between snowdrifts like veins across a white body. Families move in silence, wrapped in blankets, faces hidden behind scarves, stiff with frost. The air hums with the sound of hooves, wheels, and quiet weeping. This is not retreat or evacuation. It is an exodus. The government calls it relocation, a word too small for what it means. 400,000 people leaving the Karelian lands, carrying their lives in sacks and boxes. Some walk, some ride, some are carried. Horses pull wagons piled high with furniture and children. Old men push bicycles through the snow. Dogs trot beside them, confused but loyal. Every few miles, someone stops to rest, and the line behind them ripples like a slow river. At crossroads, soldiers direct the flow. They wear expressions too calm for the chaos around them. Each time they raise an arm to signal a turn, they see faces that might be their own families. Some recognize villages they once guarded, now emptied of voices. The war has turned defenders into guides for the displaced. In one wagon sits a woman, holding a small radio against her chest. It no longer works, but she keeps it close as if it might suddenly come alive and tell her the world still makes sense. Her son asks where they are going. She answers, somewhere with less stoke. The boy nods, pretending to understand. The farther west they travel, the colder it be. The wind blows from the sea, carrying the scent of salt and fire. Snow begins to fall again, thick and relentless. The tracks of the carts blur and vanish behind them. For every mile gained, a piece of home disappears. The people do not look back. They have learned that memory hurts more than distance. At night, they camp in fields or forests. Fires flicker between the trees, tiny islands of light in an ocean of darkness. The children sleep in piles beneath coats. The adults sit awake, staring at the flames, listening for the sounds of pursuit that never come. In the quiet, someone begins to sing an old hymn. The melody drifts across the snow, fragile but steady. Others join, their voices blending into a single tone that carries farther than they expect. For a moment, it feels like prayer. Along the route, soldiers share what little food they have. Bread frozen solid, soup made from melted snow and scraps. One officer removes his gloves to hand a child an apple saved from his rations. The fruit freezes to her fingers before she can eat it. She smiles anyway. The gesture matters more than the taste. By the third day, the column reaches the outskirts of Lahti. The first houses still stand, roofs sagging under the weight of snow. Volunteers open doors and lead the refugees inside. The air smells of smoke and coffee. Some cry at the warmth. Others simply sit down and sleep without a word. The roads behind them are empty now, a trail erased by weather. When the sun sets, the refugees who arrived first stand at the windows looking east. They can see the faint glow of the front, a red shimmer on the horizon. One man says it looks like the heart of the world still beating. Another answers that it is only fire. They both stare until the light fades. In the morning, government clerks begin taking names. They write carefully, as if by recording each person they can preserve what was lost. But names alone cannot rebuild what the snow has buried. The people of Karelia have become wanderers in their own country, carrying nothing but stories and the weight of survival. Somewhere behind them, the old villages sleep beneath the frost. When spring comes, grass will grow over the roads, and birds will return to sing where no one listens. The land will heal, but it will not forget. Neither will they. March arrives without warmth. The sun climbs higher each day, but its light feels hollow, filtered through a ski drained of color. Along the front, soldiers wait in a silence they do not trust. The shelling has stopped. The air smells of smoke and thawing snow. Everyone knows the end is near, yet no one dares to believe it. Endings are dangerous. They can vanish as easily as breath. At dawn, a messenger rides along the trenches, shouting a single word that spreads like rumor. Ceasefire. The word sounds strange, foreign, almost fragile. Some men laugh, others stare. A few keep cleaning their rifles as if the fighting might resume any moment. For 3 long months, every sunrise has meant survival bought with bullets. Now the war has ended, not with a final battle, but with a sentence spoken in another city. The soldiers climb from the trenches and stand blinking in the light. The land around them looks like the moon, cratered and gray. Smoke rises from the last fires still burning in the woods. They move cautiously, as though the earth itself might still explode. A medic kneels beside a frozen body and closes its eyes. He whispers that it is over, but the wind takes the words away. Across the lines, Soviet troops emerge from their positions. They move without formation, rifles slung low, faces hollow from cold and exhaustion. For a long moment, the two sides simply look at each other across the field that once divided life from death. Then, a single Finnish soldier lifts his hand. The gesture is awkward, uncertain, but it is enough. The others follow. The Soviets nod. No one speaks. There is nothing left to say. In Helsinki, bells ring for the first time in months. The sound drifts through the gray streets, echoing off the walls of buildings scarred by shrapnel. People stop in doorways listening. Some cry openly. Others close their eyes and whisper names of those who will never come home. The war has ended, but peace feels distant, like a dream glimpsed through glass. Far to the north, the last patrol returns from the forest. They carry no prisoners, no trophies, only silence. Their boots leave dark tracks across melting snow. The commander watches them pass and writes in his notebook, "Ceasefire effective noon. Morale uncertain." He closes the book and sits beside the road, staring at the horizon. The light there is strange, neither day nor night, but something in between. By afternoon, the guns are quiet. The sound that replaces them is the dripping of melting ice from the roofs of bunkers. The war has ended, but the landscape does not yet know it. Rivers of dark water carve through the snow, carrying away the evidence of months of battle. The ground will freeze again before it heals. As evening falls, a soldier builds a small fire at the edge of a trench. He removes his gloves and holds his hands over the flames. For the first time in weeks, he feels warmth. He looks up at the sky and sees clouds breaking apart, revealing a faint shimmer of suns. He thinks of home, of faces half remembered, of fields that might bloom again when spring comes. He closes his eyes and listens to the fire crackle. On the other side of the ceasefire line, Soviet soldiers light their own fires. The two camps glow faintly in the dark, like constellations mirrored on the ground. Between them lies a field of snow untouched since morning. The war has ended, but the night remains the same, cold, quiet, infinite. When midnight arrives, the wind dies. The world holds its breath. The last day of winter ends, and the long silence that follows feels like mercy. Spring comes slowly to Finland. The snow does not melt all at once. It softens by degrees, retreating from the fields and forests, like an old memory that refuses to fade. Beneath it lie the shapes of a war that ended but did not truly leave. Rusted helmets, twisted wire, the outlines of trenches carved into the frozen soil. When the wind blows across them, it sounds almost like breathing. Villagers return to the ruins of their homes. They walk through streets that no longer have names, guided by habit more than direction. Children run ahead, their laughter echoing in places once filled with gunfire. A woman kneels beside a blackened foundation and touches the stones as if greeting an old friend. The walls are gone, but she knows where each room used to be. Memory fills the empty space. In the north, soldiers still patrol the quiet forests. They are no longer fighting, only searching. Each day, they uncover what the snow kept hidden. A rifle leaning against a tree, a letter sealed inside a coat pocket, remains lying beneath a drift that has held them through the long winter. The men work carefully, speaking softly as if afraid to wake the ground. They mark each place with a wooden cross and move on. At a small cemetery near the Taipale River, the living gather for the first ceremony of peace. The sky is pale blue, the air sharp but gentle. A chaplain stands before rows of simple markers, reading names that echo like prayers. Some graves hold bodies. Most hold only the idea of one. When he finishes, the crowd remains silent. No applause, no song. Only the sound of wind moving through pine needles. It is enough. In Helsinki, the city rebuilds slowly. Windows are replaced. Streets cleared of debris. The bells that once warned of bombers now ring for weddings. Yet even in joy, the people carry the weight of what was lost. Every corner holds a story. Every shadow reminds them how close they came to being erased. The scars of war blend into the rhythm of daily life, like cracks in old glass, visible, but no longer dangerous. For the soldiers who survived, peace is a strange teacher. Some return to farms, others to factories. They wake in the night, still hearing artillery, still tasting smoke. They speak little of the past. When asked what it was like, they shrug and say only that it was cold. The rest lives in silence, buried beneath snow and time. Years later, a traveler walks the length of the Karelian isthmus. He finds a fragment of metal half buried in the soil. It is part of a rifle, rusted and harmless. He holds it for a moment, feeling the weight of history in his palm, then sets it back down. The wind covers it with flakes of new snow. The land has learned to keep its secrets. In the forests, the spring thaw reveals new rivers. They flow over forgotten trenches, through fields where no crops will grow again. The water carries pieces of the past downstream, buttons, bullets, shards of bone. It is not grim. It is a kind of remembering. The earth returns what it can to the light, then closes over the rest. At dusk, the temperature drops again. The last snow of the season begins to fall, slow and silent. It drifts over graves, over ruins, over the tracks left by those who once fled across the ice. It smooths everything, making no distinction between victory and defeat. The snow remembers everyone equally. It remembers the fear, the courage, the silence that followed both. And as it settles, the world seems to exhale at last.